I recently hosted a webinar and one of the participants asked a fantastic question. How do I teach resilience when I don't feel resilient? If that sounds familiar, I hope you've checked out our series on growing resilience. We have a ton of great information there to help you out. Feel free to start with this course first, though. We're so happy that you're here. So how do we raise resilient people? Sometimes our kids need our help and our feedback to keep going. But sometimes the most important and challenging thing for us as parents to do is to simply get out of the way. That is a tough decision sometimes. When is it our job to step in and help? And when is it better for us to step back? Let's talk about it. So in the last series, we talked about finding our fire and using it to fuel us to reach our goals. I have to tell you that my fire is talking about resilience. I have been at this for years, and I especially love when I get to talk with a live audience. Anyway, a few years ago, I was doing a talk for parents about resilience, and a participant mentioned that a friend of his had just gotten hired at a Fortune 500 company. His friend's first task at the new job was to hire a parent liaison to manage all of the calls from parents of employees. The other participants and I were shocked. How could so many parents of employees be calling a company that they needed to hire someone to manage it? I couldn't believe it. How could this be? What was happening in the world that a parent decides that the best course of action is to call her child's employer? It was around that same time that the term adulting became really popular. How do we feel about that word? Does it bother any of you? It kind of bothers me for some reason, almost like it shouldn't be a verb, like two adults shouldn't be a thing. Adulting doesn't sound very resilient. It sounds like we are taking something that should just happen and making it a verb. Becoming an adult doesn't just happen anymore. It is an accomplishment to be celebrated. What about the word parenting? Does that word bug you? Somehow, as a mother during the time of COVID, parenting bothers me a lot less. It totally feels like it should be a verb. I was surprised to find out that parenting wasn't widely used as a verb until the 1970s, which is around the time I was born. I wonder if my grandparents felt the same way about the word parenting that I do about adulting. They could say the same for parenting as I just said about adulting. Children don't just grow up anymore. They have to be parented. To parent is a verb. That's an accomplishment. It's something we have to do. What about the term helicopter parent? That term was actually coined in 1969. So technically, there were helicopter parents before we really even started to parent. Some very bright person somewhere may have had an inkling that if parenting became a verb, trouble might be afoot. What about other types of parents? Maybe you've heard of lawnmower parents that clear the path for their children, free of any bumps or hurdles. Or curling parents. Have any of you seen curling in the Olympics? One player runs in front of the curling stone, furiously sweeping the ice to clear the path so his teammate can win the medal. Curling parents do all of the work and their kids can win the gold. They work furiously to sweep obstacles out of the way so their kids can get all of the glory. Is there anything wrong with this kind of parenting? If parenting is something we can do, isn't it something we can do well? If we're parenting well, and if parenting is such a great thing, shouldn't more parenting only be better? What's the worst that can happen if we parent too much? Too much parenting makes adulting very difficult. The research supports this. In a recent study of college students who reported the most helicopter parenting scored the lowest on self-efficacy scales. They also gave the least adaptive responses to certain workplace scenarios. For example, when the students were asked what they would do in response to receiving a negative performance review from an employer, the students who reported the most helicopter parenting were more likely to give maladaptive responses, like saying they would quit the job, explaining to the employer why the rating was unfair, or asking a parent to call the manager on their behalf. These students were less likely to provide an adaptive response, such as saying that they would listen to the criticism and try to improve. Overparenting starts a dangerous cycle. Overparenting results in poor coping, which results in more overparenting, which results in continued poor coping. This cycle not only leads to anxiety and depression, but it also deprives kids of the opportunity to be creative problem solvers, develop coping skills, figure out who they are and what makes them happy. It deprives them of the opportunity to develop resilience. Over and over again, studies show correlations between overparenting and reduced feelings of competency, reduced satisfaction with life, reduced ability to cope emotionally with setbacks, narcissism, greater alienation from peers, greater likelihood of being medicated for anxiety or depression, and greater use of pain medicines for purposes other than reducing pain. It makes sense, though. If we continue to overparent rather than parenting ourselves out of a job, we never get out of the job of parenting. When we as parents hover and coax and push, kids don't have space to find their passion. When we clear the path for our kids, they do not have the opportunity to benefit from the learning that happens when they fail or make mistakes. They do not pick up the skills that they need to work for long-term goals. When we overparent and do for our kids what they can do themselves, they get the message that they can't do their lives without us. When we do the fifth grade science project, we send our fifth grader the message that they are not capable of doing fifth grade. When we take over the editing of the paper in ninth grade, we send our ninth grader the message that ninth grade is too hard for them. They cannot do it without our help. When we control every aspect of the college application process, we let our high school seniors know that they are not going to be able to function without us. Why then should we be surprised when we hear stories of parents calling college professors or employers to advocate for their adult children? When we send the message to our kids that they can't do their lives without us, they listen. They believe that we're right. If they can't do fifth grade or ninth grade or apply to college without our hands-on support every step of the way, why would they be able to do college or their first jobs without us? When we back off and let them handle the age-appropriate challenges that come their way, they learn that they are capable of pushing through and working for long-term goals. It can be hard to back off. There's a reason that fifth graders and ninth graders and even college applicants don't live alone. When is it our job as parents to help? And when is it our job to back off? It can be hard in the moment to figure out how much is too much parenting. There are essentially 3 ways overparenting unwittingly causes psychological harm. When we do for our kids what they can already do for themselves, when we do for our kids what they can almost do for themselves, when our parenting behavior is motivated by our own ego. When we do for our kids what they can already do for themselves or what they can almost do for themselves, we send the message to our kids that they can't actually do our lives without us. They don't learn to think for themselves. They have to constantly check with us to make sure they are doing it right. When our parenting behavior is motivated by our own ego, their life is our accomplishment. Their failures are our fault. We measure our worth by children's accomplishment, and then we set the bar so high that it requires our constant and intense involvement. So instead of trying to raise children whose accomplishments reflect positively on us, we need to try to raise resilient people. We want to raise resilient people who meet the world on their own terms. People that are autonomous and independent. In some ways, the last year has made that more difficult. We have moved children away from school where they had coaches, teachers, and peers to support them and help them to become more resilient. We have tasked parents who are often trying to navigate working their own full-time jobs with the job of coach, teacher, and peer. This is hard. We've gotten used to many people bearing this load, and now it is down to us. It can feel so overwhelming to add build resilience to our already overwhelming to-do list. On the other hand, we need challenge to build resilience, and there certainly has been no shortage of challenges in the last year. Let's pause for a second to think about that. What challenges have your kids faced in 2020? They have probably surprised you in the ways they have been resilient in the last year. How are your kids resilient? How would you have answered that a year ago? So let's talk about how to build resilience in our kids. Let's think about how we encourage our kids to keep going and see that this challenge, whatever it is not going to be the thing that brings them down. We're going to talk about a simple 3-step process to promote resilience in our kids. First, we validate. We validate the feeling and we validate the challenge that lies before them. We have to name it as a challenge so we can help them gather their resilience to face it. Next, we assess. We assess the challenge and determine whether it is something our child can do or almost do. Finally, we support. We offer enough scaffolding to support our child as they grow and develop, but not so much that we interfere with their development.